Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Progressing special book event. I want to thank A Room of One's Own bookstore in Madison for co-sponsoring this event tonight, and I want to thank all of you for joining us here on this live book event with our very guest tonight. Just really briefly to start off, the Progressive Magazine is a 112-year-old national political magazine based in Madison, Wisconsin. It was founded by Fighting Bob La Follette, Robert M. La Follette, and it's still going today. And we really appreciate all of the subscribers and supporters. If you want more information, you can go to our website at progressive.org, and you can get the information about how to subscribe. You can get information about how to donate to support this work, and you can also get information about all of the news and so on that we cover here on this program. I want to also thank Daniel Libby, our development director, back there monitoring the chat for tonight's conversation. And so if you have a question at any point during the event, please chat it through either Facebook or YouTube, and Daniel will be monitored and will be getting the questions to our guest for tonight's program. Well, I'm very, very pleased to the book event tonight. Mary Lang Sollinger. I have known Mary since I don't know, at least since she worked on the Monona Terrace Convention Center, and has been a great set to Madison. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you.
Most recently, you hosted a benefit event for the Progressive Magazine at your wonderful home with Ed Asner, the legendary Emmy Award-winning television actor. And that was a very fine event in December of last year, a full year ago, just a couple of weeks more than a year ago. And who knew then that we would be where we are today? But before the event with Ed Asner, you hosted another very prominent guest, and that's what tonight's program is going to be about. The book that Mary has written, From Inspiration to Activism, A Personal Journey Through Obama's Presidential Campaign, really talks about not just a particular presidential candidate, but the whole nature of grassroots organizing and how you build support for a progressive candidate and how you build fundraising to make an election happen. And Mary's going to talk about that tonight. She's got several readings from the book, and then we're also going to be taking questions. And just about a week ago now, the book was awarded the Chicago Writers Association 2020 Book of the Year in the nonfiction category. And this is a particular note because they usually only give this award to Chicago authors. And here we have an author from Madison, Wisconsin, although the topic was certainly a well-known Chicagoan. So I'm sure that swayed their interest in picking up the book in the first place.
Well, can I add something?
Oh, please. I'm going to give you the floor right now, Mary Lang Sollinger, and Mary's going to talk for a little bit about the process and the product of this book. And then we'll hear some readings from it, and then we'll take your questions. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Norm. You took me down memory lane there for a couple of minutes with the Monona Terrace and everything. I do want to show people the cover of the book because Ed Asner's quote is right up here. And that all happened the night that I was doing the fundraiser for Progressive Magazine. And I was shocked that he actually called me and said he liked the book because if you remember, he wasn't a big fan of Obama's at the time. And we had a very exciting and inclusive conversation with Ed that he stayed for 2 hours instead of the 45 minutes that he had planned. So your guess, and it was quite memorable actually. So I wanted to show this to people and the reason I did this is because I didn't want it to be just perceived to be a political book. I have some great testimonies of some wonderful folks, Tammy and Tammy Baldwin, I'm sorry, and Mark Pocan and Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia. But I really wanted to cross the path. And to let you know, one of my early supporters, another author, who told me about the Chicago Writers Association competition, turned out to be a libertarian. And when I found out that she liked the book so much and was helping me, because this is a whole new world for me, it was great. And I told her I was so happy that she told me that, and that she was a libertarian. So I was hoping that it would really appeal to a lot of people. And I think it's probably more important, especially after January 6th and our wonderful inaugural that we had yesterday. So with that, I will I'm going to be doing 4 different readings, and they're different parts. When Obama came to my house, I noticed on the chat some folks were at the house here in October of 2007. It changed my life forever. I was not a Democrat at the time, and but I was doing Democratic or fundraisers for Democrats, and because that's where my heart is and was, and also for nonprofits. So we did one political and one nonprofit. So that's how I got the call. And so the first reading is in chapter 3, and it's called The First Door is the Hardest. This is in Dubuque, Iowa, and if you remember, the Iowa election was at that time January 3rd. We were knocking on doors in rural, out in the rural areas, and it was hard and it was cold. People were very nice though, and they appreciated us. So the beginning of the reading starts with each of the candidates had a meeting. This is the caucus room, and this is the night of the caucus. I think all of you are aware of the caucus procedure, which I was not at the time, but people come. You can't vote early or anything like that. You have to come that particular night. And it was in a big, it was not a high school, but it was a big church room, a big auditorium that belonged to a church. And it was very cold that night. It was like, I think, the 19 below zero chill factor. But so each of the candidates had meeting rooms, but only the Obama campaign had sectioned off a room for babysitting so delegates could drop off their kids. This idea had empowered more caucus members to attend. Michael Dorsey, the staff person that we had met and guiding us, and the Obama campaign staff had expected a very large turnout, and they were right. Someone in the campaign told me, "Mary, we need you to babysit in the kids' room." Much of my time in the Iowa caucuses was spent wiping noses, prepping baby bottles. That was fine with me. My attitude was wherever I was needed. All at once, many more parents were joyously arriving into the room. Candidate Obama had won this precinct. I was in Dubuque, by the way. Could it be possible that he could win all of Iowa? We returned to our freezing cars, relieved that our engines started up. We were all gathering in the Dubuque sports bar downtown, and just a couple streets from the Dubuque headquarters. We were all waiting anxiously for the announcement of the winner. Soon after our arrival, Michael Dorsey shared the results. Seconds later, it was on the large TV screen. Obama had won Iowa with 37.6% of the votes. As I drove back with some other volunteers back to Madison, we still couldn't believe it. It hit us that we really had witnessed and had been part of history. Halfway back to Madison, I got a call from a friend, a strong Hillary supporter who had been in the caucus precinct in Des Moines. As one of my friends who couldn't believe that I was supporting Obama and not Hillary, she was now venting about the Iowa caucus results. She had not been talking to me in the past 2 months. She wasn't happy that I was not supporting Hillary. The quote, "The freaking guy had babysitting rooms," she said. "I know, I was in one of those rooms." What were you doing in a babysitting room? It didn't matter what I was doing. Doing anything to help Obama win was the issue. That was followed by a few of cuss words from her. Despite my friend's frustration, the ride went fast. We knew that this was just the beginning, and we had a great time exchanging our experiences at Dubuque. That was then moving on to chapter 6, keeping the faith in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was a very tough city. We were in South Pittsburgh, and we were met by really happy Democrats. We got a message here in Madison that they were short on volunteers and that they'll take anybody. And so we drove in two cars from Madison to Pittsburgh. We had a good welcome from the Democrats, but it was this excerpt is like after 3 days of knocking on doors, people yelling at us. Some of the guys got dogs sicked on them. People were very angry. This was a steel town. Remember 20 years ago, a lot of unions just didn't ever come back because a lot of the steel went over to China. So the reading is, on Monday the day before the vote, we were trying to cover as much ground as possible. We kept the sliding doors of Renee's van open so Joan, Neil, and Blake and I could jump in and out like paratroopers as we cruised the streets, handing out information, leaving door hangers on all the doors when people didn't answer. That morning, we landed in a trailer park. Blake and I took the lower half of the map. Joan, Neil took the upper part. Renee stayed with Joan and Neil. Their list was larger and was more spread out. Not too many people at the trailer park were home. The ones who did come to the door were surprised to see us, and a few were even talkative. When we turned the corner and we saw our next knock, this trailer had an old Confederate flag hanging on the outside of it. I sighed. The campaign told us not to take any risks, that our safety was always first. But it was mid-morning. Blake had a cell phone, and Renee was only a few minutes away. All the names on our sheets had at one time voted Democratic. I told Blake I would be careful. He stood on the side of me next to the wall of the trailer with a cell phone in hand. The person answering the door would only see me. After I knocked, I heard a TV in a male smoker's gruff voice who asked him to go to the door. Slowly and carefully, a small girl opened the inner door. I said, hello. She was only about 5 years old and pretty, but she looked like she hadn't had a bath for quite a while. She turned to me and said, Grandpa, there's a lady here. What does she want? The girl had beautiful sparkling eyes. She asked me what I wanted, opening up the door just a little bit wider. I showed her the brochure, and she told her that I was here to talk about the voting tomorrow. She repeated it to the man. Now I saw he was an older man in a recliner sitting with his legs propped up while watching TV. He turned down the sound. Another little girl was sitting near him, staring at me. She wasn't scared, just curious and shy. I gave the girl at the door the brochure to give to her grandpa. After taking it and giving it a look, he said, I've seen the N-word on TV. There was no anger in his voice. To him, the N-word was just another word. I inhaled and said, yes, Obama had gotten a lot of publicity. I told him that the Pennsylvania primary election was just the next day. I reminded myself I was in a different culture. He asked me to come in, and I said I didn't have much time. He asked me why I was knocking on his door. I thought long and hard about going out and volunteering for Obama, I told him. I was convinced our country would be better off because I felt I could trust him. He kind of smiled and said, wouldn't that be something for the N-word? I went on to say that his daughter was at work and he would give her our pamphlet. I thanked him, and I looked at this little girl, gave her a warm smile, and thanked her as well. She closed the door, and finally she smiled back at me. She reminded me of why we were knocking on doors while Obama was running for president. I knew that Obama would understand the situation. We were all part of they were all part of why he was in this race. He had lived with children in poverty when he was young and in Jakarta with his mom. I turned to Blake, who was a bit shaken. All I could say was, I think he likes Obama. He will give the brochure to his daughter. It was probably she who had voted Democratic and the reason the address was on our sheet. I took a deep breath and had to get some things sorted out in my head. The next one is from Chapter 7, Indianapolis That Changed My Heart and My Mind Forever. This was the afternoon of a morning meeting for my first National Finance Committee meeting in Indianapolis downtown. And I had a car. And well, first of all, they asked who had a car because there were suburbs that if you had a car, you could go to the suburb. Most people that came to that meeting flew in. So I saw men, and mostly men actually, there weren't a lot of women there, rolling up, taking off their beautiful Italian suit jackets, rolling up their shirt sleeves and taking off their silk ties and going knocking on doors for Obama in the inner city in Indianapolis. I share that with you because I knew at that moment I was in the right group of people. It was a great thing. So I said I had a car. So they said, please go out to, you're going to Madison. Yep, here's a suburb on the way out to Madison. And we didn't have GPS at the time. They gave me the instructions and I found it. So some wonderful things happened in between, but because of the time, I can elaborate about it later if you want. This is after knocking about maybe 12, 15 doors. The people were not coming to the door right away. So this is one of the breakthrough knocks. A few had heard my accent and wanted to know where I was from. I'm not sure which triggers triggered their comment. They just knew that I didn't sound like anyone from Indiana. When I said Wisconsin, they asked who paid for my gas for the car and who was paying me for knocking on doors. They could hardly believe that I was doing this on my own. No one was paying me any money or offering me any favors. Many times I ended by saying, there are a lot of people like me who are volunteering for him throughout the country. I wanted to give them hope. I was glad to do this work. It felt fulfilling, like I was making a difference for the people with whom I talked. We had some open and straightforward conversations, which were rewarding. It felt like hope was real. One person I met that day will stay with me forever. Before she opened up the door, I heard her rubber soles slippers scraping on the plastic floor runner on the other side of the door. The door barely opened. I saw one yellow eye with just part of a face of leather and gray hair. I held up the Obama brochure and she opened up the doors 2 inches more. Short and bent over, the woman had deep wrinkles from the sun in her face. Her fingers were thick from years of hard labor. Her hands reminded me of old farmers' hands in my hometown, but these hands were much more gnarled. She was shaking her head no. I spoke a little louder. Maybe she didn't hear me the first time. There are thousands of other people like me who are working for Barack Obama. We want him to be president. We are working very hard for him. Her head stopped shaking no. She looked me straight in the eye. With the saddest eyes I've ever seen, she said clearly, if he gets to Washington, they will tear him apart limb by limb. I don't want that to happen to him. A shiver came over me. I pictured what she might have seen, maybe as a child or an adult. I'd heard stories from Blacks about why they had moved their families north. It was domestic terrorism that we white folks could not even imagine. No way could we understand this country's history. It would be a painful journey for this country to truly come to terms with its bloody history of racism and demonizing a people. This would be a journey well worth taking so that we can move on together and unite and keep our country united. I tried to reassure that too many people cared about Barack Obama. If he won, he would have the majority of the country behind him and things would be okay. Looking down at the colorful brochure, she took it from my hand and nodded goodbye. I walked slowly to the next door. trying to take in her words. She couldn't be right, but she was so certain. I didn't know her past. She could be the granddaughter of a slave or a sharecropper. I didn't know what this woman had witnessed or had endured. After 4 hours of knocking on doors, I talked to the people, and talking to people, I experienced a humility that I never felt before, as well as entitlement that I'd always taken for granted. The last reading is from chapter 8. It says, which is, fundraisers are not all about money. This was a segment of where I was trying to figure out how to help the people up north, the candidates up north. And I was going to try something out. It was an experiment that turned out to be successful. And grouping several candidates together seemed like a good idea to offer their support. They just needed a well-known, well-respected headliner who would attract a good number of sponsors and attendees. It was also good for the candidates to meet each other. A few retired state legislators contacted me and let me know how difficult it was to raise in the northern part of Wisconsin. Its farms and tourism economies were unstable and seasonal. The districts were geographically large and sparsely populated. The Madison candidates could make one call and ask for $100. Up north, the candidates could only ask for $25 on a call. My goal was for each candidate to take $2,000 each. At the fundraiser, each woman candidate spoke from only an index card, no stump speeches. I wanted authenticity, and I wanted them to talk from their hearts about why they were running and what their background was. It was then followed by questions from the guests. I thought Peg Lautenschlager would be an ideal headliner. She was from the middle of the state and was the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Wisconsin, appointed by President Clinton. She was the state's first woman Attorney General. She also had served on the Attorney General's Advisory Committee under U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno. Peg had fought for public access to our Capitol building during the protests of Act 10 and did pro bono legal work for young people in Fond du Lac. Many people knew and respected her. Peg was battling breast cancer while in office, which she missed only a few days. A few years later, her cancer returned. She had to retire. When I ran into her at a fundraiser for a women's group called Emerge in Milwaukee, I asked if she would be the headliner for a fundraiser at my home for several female candidates running for office from up north. Without hesitation, Peg said yes. I gave her some dates, and she called back the next day with 2 possibilities. I phoned the 4 candidates and asked them to work around Peg's dates. We found a date that worked for everybody. It would be in early December. All the planning calls went well. As expected, Peg was a terrific draw for the event. I checked with her the night before, to see how she was doing. The last couple of days were tough, she said in a hoarse voice. In the middle of our conversation, she had to leave the phone for a few minutes. Take your time, Peg. I heard her coughing in the background. When she returned, I asked her if she wanted to stay overnight at my house. After the event, her drive would be an hour and a half. She said that spending the night would not be necessary. 2 friends would be driving her. After I hung up, I wondered if she was going to make it to the fundraiser. She sounded so weak on the phone. The next day, Peg arrived about 20 minutes early in a beautiful cream wool suit wearing a Santa Claus hat. She was energized. Our living room was filled with 80 people. Peg did something different at the end of her short talk. She expanded on a remark. We were short in reaching $2,000 per candidate. She walked the guests through the disparity and the difficulty of fundraising up north. She described the savings of the staff that the $2,000 would represent. Her presentation resonated with the group. A group of women wrote wrote checks, and we did reach our $8,000 for the 4 candidates. I called her the next day with the good news that we had reached our financial goal, and thanks to her compelling talk. I asked her to call me the next time she was in Madison so I could take her out for lunch and we could catch up. That was the last time I talked to Peg. She died 10 weeks later. That's part of the book.
Well, thank you, Mary, so much for those readings. You know, it's really moving to hear these stories firsthand from the person who participated in them. And we're going to open it up for questions in just a second, so that if you have questions for Mary about the book and about these stories and about her work as an organizer for all these different campaigns, now is a great time to do it. You can do it in the chat on the YouTube channel or on the Facebook channel. And Daniel Libby, our development director, is monitoring both of those simultaneously, and will be transmitting the questions to us here in the virtual bookstore where we're sitting right now. I want to thank Room of One's Own for hosting this event, and we have another one coming up in February. We're going to have author Frank Smythe and his brand new book on the history. Actually, it's called The Unofficial History of the NRA, and that event is going to be actually on the anniversary of the tragic Parkland shooting. So that'll be in February. Stay tuned for announcements about that. In the meantime, if you want to get a copy of Mary's book, if you don't own one yet, or if you have a friend that needs to own one, you can get a signed copy of this book for merely making a donation to the Progressive Magazine of $35 or more. It will help us. In fact, the entire amount helps us, because Mary has generously donated the books and the mailing of the book. So she will mail the book to your home at her expense. And thank you. With her signature, right? So, Mary, thank you so much for that generous offer and your support of the Progressive for so many years as well. The Progressive Magazine, as I said, a 112-year-old political magazine based here in Madison. This is our December-January issue. The issue for February-March just went to the printer yesterday. And so that will be coming out in a couple of weeks, and a very, very fine issue with a lot of stuff about hopes and expectations for a new administration. And I'm actually going to start off the round of questions on that theme. We scheduled this event to take place tonight because it's the day after the inauguration. It was 4 years ago, on the day after the inauguration, that the historic global women's marches took place, and we had millions of people all around the country and around the globe gathering to march against the presidency of Donald Trump, but for the possibility of a more inclusive society. And so we chose this night for those two auspicious reasons. It really was a historic inauguration last night in many ways, partly because of the disruption caused by the coronavirus pandemic, partly because of the, I guess, actually welcome absence of the former occupant of the White House, but also because the first African-American woman was sworn in as Vice President of the United States. And of course, Joe Biden served as Vice President under Barack Obama, who we're talking about in this book tonight, and Barack Obama, the first African-American president of the United States in 2008. This book, Mary, covers not only that period of starting in 2007 and going through the victory of Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, but you move forward into other campaigns, as we just heard, working for electoral campaigns onward. And I want to ask you to talk about the hope that inspired you to write this book.
Well, to go back just a little bit, the main reason was there were three words I didn't bring up yet. They didn't appear, but I normally talk about it afterwards. Is REI, very much like this retail store. Respect, empower, and include. And I was trying to figure out why, he wasn't supposed to win. I want to reiterate that because, people say, oh, Mary, he was such a great speaker, he was going to win anyway. No, that was not going to happen. When he came to my house, I found out 6 months later, when I was in Indianapolis, it was my first National Finance Committee meeting. I did serve on his finance committee meetings, or his committees, in 2008 and 2012. And then I also did the, my light just went off. I also did the Hillary, and then I'm just finishing up serving on the National Finance Committee for Biden and Harris. And those three, it was such a joy to work with the Biden campaign staff. It reminded me very much of the REI that I talk about in the book. And it's very simple. They're just three little words. I did, in a small meeting, I did tell, at the time, the President, Barack Obama, that these were important words. And he said, Mary, I think you're putting too much emphasis on three words. And then he kind of challenged me. I kind of forgot where I was. I challenged him back a little bit. Then he came to me after the meeting and said, maybe you have something there. Because we can remember it, and when I get a chance to go on the podium, I do weave that in, because it's become a wonderful way of living your life, because it's based on trust. And in one of these book readings, someone raised their hand and said, respect is the greatest form of love. And it shocked me. And it was amazing to hear that, because it's true. And I want to tie, I think Biden, I told people, I said, don't worry about Biden. He's going to come out of on the day after, actually the day of his inaugural, like a racehorse out of the cage. And he's doing that because he's been there for 8 years. And they had, even Axelrod was talking about it last night. They were not that close when they started out, when he chose them, but the balance was there. And they had the same value sets, which was very important. But they really became bros. You'll hear them talk about that behind the scenes and stuff. And it was just, he learned a lot, and he learned it thoroughly because their values were so similar. So when I started working on the Biden campaign back in, it really picked up in March, April, May. I thought, my God, I think I'm seeing and feeling REI again. And because the telephone calls would come back and everything else. So I'm really excited that we can use these words in the book because of the award and everything else, but because, as you heard, I'm sure on the news just about a couple hours ago, several times actually today, we can't become complacent. We got too complacent for, in 2008. And I want to remind people that Obama only had 2 years of his first term that he had the Senate, he had a Democratic Senate and House. The rest of the years were like purgatory, okay? And I was always amazed at when there were quite a few times. In the book, there's a picture. It's my favorite picture. Let me just share it with everybody. How many people do we have on the call?
There's a bunch. I can't see all the numbers right now, but thank you everybody for joining us. And
I just wanted to hold this up, but this is, oops, a daisy. This is a meeting. I don't know. Can you folks see that? Can you see this, Norm?
Not too well. It's not too well with the lighting, but
yeah, it's there would be these round tables of 30 or 40 people, 30, 35 people, and he was always on. He was, always respectful, always empowering people. He would come in and talk for 3 minutes, and I do mean 3 minutes, and then turn over to the people who were at the table for questions. And he was never prompted. He never had staff with him. The only person in the room was Secret Service. So so you learn a lot from people, and you learn that we have a lot to learn. And the reason for writing this book is to not let the REI die, not to let cobwebs on it. And there's profiles of a lot of other volunteers. Peg was one of them, because I was assuming that a lot of people on the call would know about Peg Lawton Schlatter, and I don't want her to fade either. Mitch Miller was another person, and Linda Farley. But I think that we have people that we should always learn from, and the book was really to learn from other volunteers and how difficult it was for them to knock on doors. And he got people in that never had gotten involved in politics like me. I did 12 events in 14 months in the state of Wisconsin. Go figure.
One of the questions from a listener was whether or not you met Barack Obama, and you've talked about that a little bit, but I want to talk about the very beginning of the book, where you got the phone call to host this event, and you didn't even realize that he was going to be there. And partway through the conversation, you said, "Is the candidate coming to this event?"
Well, you know what? Well, I even told Zach. I said, Zach, why don't you call up Sally Martiniak? She loves the guy. I read the book. I really liked the book. I've got a lot, and I had a lot of girls, a lot of friends who said, Mary, you got to go with Hillary. You were an entrepreneur. You did a lot of firsts. Monroe Terrace was a big thing. And, but I vote for the person who's motivated. I think motivation is very, very important. And when Zach called up, he called up around 4:30. He had to have an answer by 8 o'clock. My husband was out biking. He was late coming in. In fact, he came in at 20 to 8. And there's some women friends here for a meeting. And they brainwashed me. They said, are you kidding me? But the reason I asked that, because at that time, people sometimes they would send a surrogate, like somebody famous, and then when Zach said, well, you got to charge $500 per ticket. And if they want a photo, then they have to pay another $500. And he also said that we had to fundraise, and Obama was in Madison for 2.5 hours, $140,000. Remember, this is 2008. and so that sort of intimidated me a little bit and made me think. But Hans came home, and one of the things that, and I'll be real blunt about this, one of the things that got me going about it when I was thinking and talking to these two friends of mine is that in the book, I hitchhiked out to Harvard with my boyfriend, who had graduated from Harvard, and went down to Columbia, and that was the beginning of the revolution in SDS. My boyfriend was an SDSer, and I didn't know what that really was until I got at the Harvard campus. And McNamara was there I think it was like 2 or 3 days before. They either, Norma, did they turn over his car? Or did they just stop the car from coming on campus any farther to the auditorium where he was supposed to speak?
Yeah, I think they just stopped the car, but
did they just stop it? Yeah. My memory was that they actually overturned it, and he got out, and then they overturned it. But anyway, and so then we went down to Columbia and seeing what the SDSers were doing down there. But the small town girl farming, going and hitchhiking, which was another story.
That's the next place I want to go in this conversation. We've got a couple more questions, and I will get to those in a second. But in the book, you talk about how you read Obama's book about his father, which he had written, of course, just after he got out of college. So it was long before he was a presidential candidate.
Not 1995.
Yeah. But you said that it reminded you in some ways of your thinking about your father. And you've got a whole chapter where you talk about your own growing up and coming to Madison and becoming active in the community. And just say a couple of words about that.
That took about 2 or 3 years to figure out, because, my father's white, Barack is black, right? And I thought, I really got to figure this out before I shared this information with people. But my father had the same values that Barack Obama had. And Barack Obama was brought up by his grandfather, and his grandfather was in World War II, and my father was in World War II. And it was the greatest generation, which I regret that that book was out, because any generation is great when they give their lives up for their country. But my father had these words like Buster, and these sayings that all generations have. Like, we're from the old hippie things. We have cool and all these other, we could name all these drugs that no one can even know about. And there's I started watching really closely, and I watched his quotes afterwards. This is back in 2011, 10 and 11. And I was starting to save. I wish I would have saved more of them, but they were the same words of that generation. And I think that, I know he's a great, smooth talking person, everything, and elegant and eloquent, but I think that he used the same jargon, the same words of the greatest generation. And I think subconsciously that is how he masked the support so fast, was REI and speaking the language of the masses of our country. And that group was still very much alive. And they were, our fathers. So my generation, your generation, heard those words too, and subconsciously related to them. Now, I felt so comfortable around him at the house. Somebody asked about meeting him. The first time I met him was at the house. The security had to be doubled. It was awful. It was when the Secret Service, my contact Dan, told me, and I said, why there's so many people? Last night you said was going to be only 5 people, and now there's like 15, and they're blocking off the roads. And he said, don't ask, we had too many calls last night. And I thought, my God, I live 12 blocks from our Capitol, for people who may be out of town. And Tenny Lapham is the most safest city, along with Willie Street, probably the whole doggone Midwest. And hearing that minutes before he came through the door, just really, oh man, I couldn't process that. Dan walked me through something that was in the house that I asked him, why could they move it? He said, don't you dare touch that. And it was, what it was? It was the gas mask that our legislators were using, who were up in the balcony. And on January 6th, they had those masks. That's what that was. He told me that was going to be a gas mask, in fact, if there was any tear gas or any type of air pollution. And he told me that the Secret Service would be lining up 6 feet apart. And I don't think they ever turned off the car when he was in my house. And they turned the car around, so the car was facing the street. They drove in and they switched the car around so they could make a fast getaway. And it took me a couple of days to really get over that, because again, we're in this bubble, right? 12 years ago, this was a big bubble. So
one of the questions, I want to say, a lot of the book talks about the campaign trail and door knocking that you did, and the experience, person-to-person contact. And one of the questions is, do you have a sense of how effective knocking on doors and leaving leaflets is in a campaign, as opposed to advertising that's not on site? And of course, this is a particularly poignant question in this last couple of campaign seasons, where we have been restricted in person-to-person contact since March of last year.
Yeah, just like Biden, because he's people. He loves to touch people and talk to people and eye-to-eye people. It was really tough. In some states, in all honesty, they did go out knocking on doors. They were knocking on doors in Georgia, and 6 feet away, masks and everything else. But I made 690 calls for the November election for Chris Marion, one day for Patty Shackner, and then one day in Milwaukee. And boy, I sure miss that eye-to-eye contact. And people, I have to say this, and I should say this, the calls were really rough. When you don't see somebody face to face, they take much more liberties on what they think, how they treat you. When I was making calls in Georgia, and I learned something I think I'm always going to keep, is call the person Mr. Smith or Miss Johnson, because there was a whole different tone in our, when I made 4 or 5 days calling in Georgia. And I always give my full name. I don't say I'm Mary. I'm Mary Lang Sollinger. I've always done that because I feel that's respectful to them. They feel a little bit safer that somebody would give them their, that I would give the full name. If anybody, maybe people don't know, but there's a great app that we have that shows the person's name, how old they are, male or female, their city, their polling place, so we can talk to them and engage them. And there's a script that I hardly ever use because it is a script, and I want to, engage with people. And the computer makes a telephone calling for you now, which saves a ton of time. So, and I have to say, out of 690 calls, I talked to about 30 people. Okay. But when you get a call from somebody who gives you the effort and they talk about QAnon, okay, and the opening sentence, and you're on there and you think, you go 2 steps forward and then doggone 10 minutes later, you fall back, go 2 steps forward. And then after 20 minutes, I told, his name was Dave. And I said, Dave, I just don't think we're going anywhere on this conversation. Again, this is on the phone. And I've never sent this to anybody, but it was rough. And I said, I think I'm going to say a prayer for you. And it got real quiet at the other end, and it gave me the effort and hung up on me. And it's very hard. You get up, you walk around, you clear your head, and it's very hard. And this happened to a lot of people. It's not just me, because I talked to some other volunteers, but it's very hard to pick up the phone and call again. When I would see male, 36, 40, 45, man, I thought, maybe I should start having some wine or margarita during these calls.
But you still recommend this kind of person-to-person contact, phone calling or door knocking when possible, rather than television ads or social media ads, where so much of the money is spent today.
Absolutely. I believe in it so much. Again, another reason for the book. You meet other, when you're knocking on doors, you meet other friends, you meet other people, kindred spirits. I still have friends who have become very close. They're 10 years old, and I met them one in Dubuque. Another lady, friend of a friend, and somebody in North Carolina, in Washington, and we just hit it off, and we still text each other about once a day sometimes. So you meet kindred spirits, and this REI with trust. You can trust these people, the people that you meet, and let me say it this way: with Obama's campaign and Biden's campaign, everybody was in it to win for the candidate. We were doing it for the love of our country. In the old way of doing campaigns, people had an agenda. They were starting to, I want to put this on my resume, or they wanted to drive the candidate at that time. It was their turn to drive the candidate. I mean, you never heard that in Biden's campaign or in Obama's campaign. It was, and we were told a number of times that you're doing this and I'm talking about the National Finance Committee, because my group is the group that goes for the ambassadorships. They said, and they said, you have to have an affinity to become an ambassador to a country that you want. You have to learn the language, you have to be from there, you have to know the culture so you can honor it better, respect it better. So these are things that happen behind the scenes, that why people say that the Obama administration was so very different than they'd ever seen.
And the ambassadorship that you wanted was Madison, Wisconsin, right?
Well, that's another book.
So let's talk a little bit more about the stories in the book. Again, it's filled with so many personal stories, and what you're doing is you're sharing stories about these different people that you met. One, as you mentioned, Peg Lautenschlager, and we have a question from a listener who wants to know, Josh Call, who of course is Peg's son, is possibly thinking of running for higher office, and they're saying they're concerned that the very important position of Attorney General would then be open openly contested again here. And I wonder if you could just talk for a minute about state politics here in Wisconsin and what you've observed over the years in your work. You talked a little bit earlier about the 2011 uprising. Talk about the state of Wisconsin for us.
We've had such good governing for such a long, starting with this guy, good old Bob, and lots of other, governors afterwards, that we didn't learn the skills. I mentioned my friend down in North Carolina, that we needed when Walker came on board. And I don't, my husband's from Germany, so I don't mean to offend anybody German here, but I don't know why it takes us such a long time to learn things and to say, that's why I wrote the book. I had the darndest time to say, why can't we learn from this man, and it was hard when some of the people were young people. And when Mary Burke lost, that dreadful loss in 2014, I have an email list that started with the event here in 2007 with Obama, and I kept building it up. It's about 700 plus now, and they're all current addresses and things. It was, how can I say this? It was very, I just heard excuses all the time. And I said, I wrote this email, got 50 people, emailing back. I was trying to say, we can do this again. It was a terrible loss. We have to, I was trying to build up more hope, what I learned from Obama, and I got 50 people writing back, and they needed a shoulder to talk on, right? And they wrote and wrote and wrote. And so I thought, these are wonderful thoughts. I want them to be heard. I want to respect them. I want to empower them, right? So I wrote another email within about 12 hours because they were coming in, and I put all their thoughts together. And then at the bottom, I put all their names together. I didn't say this, I didn't quote people directly. This is what Norm Stockwell did, or this is what I see some names here, but Susan Smith said, or this is when. So I put them all together so they wouldn't be attacked by people. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want people, because there's so much gossip in this world this political world when I started. So I never quote people's names or this person said that or anything. And a lot of it's just innocent, but it does a lot of damage because things are misinterpreted. And so it's called, and I couldn't figure out what to name it because I was really being pretty hard on the people. They were making so many excuses, and I called it Tough Love. And when people start, whining about gerrymandering, whatever, I remember some of the stories I've learned from people in the South, and their perseverance, political and not political people. We've never had, like I said in the book, white people can't imagine the atrocities of slavery and the Jim Crow. I always thought Jim Crow was just a matter of speaking, and sometimes they had more trouble. Oh man, was I stupid. So I feel that, I can't tell you how many times I tell our Wisconsin, I said, look in the mirror, stop whining, stop pointing the finger at somebody else, look in the mirror, do the positive thing, like the women, I just feel that our candidates owe people, when somebody comes to the House now after Barack Obama, because he took 4 questions, right? And no one would take questions when I was doing these fundraisers. And so after he came, I said, if I do a fundraiser at my house, this is for people who wanted to run or current run. I said, you have to take pictures of the volunteers because they save us thousands of money. And when they come into my house, they take a check. All the money that we collect at the door goes to the candidate. And I want to do that. But it's because of those volunteers that come in the morning before, they come in the next day and work their hearts out. Because it started by people wanting to see Obama and Tim Kaine and some other, and they didn't have the money. I said, I want to include you. So can you bring your favorite recipe? Can you bring your most popular recipe? And that's how I could include more people. So it was just, I think I lost my train of thought with going off so when people come here, so they have to honor and respect the volunteers with their time on picture taken, and they have to take questions. And if you can believe this, when I first said this to the first candidate, they had to think about it. And I said, oh my God.
And you said, well, Barack Obama did it, so.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, this guy walked there were 140 people at the house. He was 23 points below, his things. USA Today, a couple of days before, said the scallywag group of, no one knew Axelrod, no one knew David Plouffe. Bob Gibbs was a Southern guy that had twang. And he walks in here, and the fourth question that Malele, from the originator of Umoja, she sneaks in. I see her there. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is trouble. I got to know her very well. I just loved her. And she asked a question she didn't like. It was about education. And she says, Hump, that's not good enough. It's in the book. And I'm having the sweats. I'm calling, one Mrs. He takes the microphone. This picture here is me running up to him, taking that microphone away from him so no one else can ask him a question. And I'm patting him on the back, and I said, God, Barack, your arm was blue. And he was giving me this is, you can't see it on the screen, unfortunately, but this really sweet smile. And he did 9, I had counted 9 Mississippis when he was thinking of a second answer for Malele. And I was just praying that he would, that she would be okay with the second answer. And she was. But she says, Hump, that's good enough.
So the book is from inspiration to activism, and it's really full of all these stories, but it's also full of all kinds of tips and tricks about organizing. And that's what's so important, I think, about the lessons in this book. You tell people how to do these fundraisers, how to make it work, how to be successful in building for progressive candidates. And I want to wrap it up here because we promised not to go much more than an hour on this virtual medium that we are in. But we talked a little bit about the divided nature of Wisconsin. And of course, Wisconsin in many ways was a bellwether for the nation. And we have now this incredibly divided nation. And what are your hopes for moving forward? We had the dramatic inauguration events and celebrations yesterday. What are your hopes for moving forward in the first 100 days of the Biden administration?
You mean what Joe can do, our new president can do?
What your hopes are for what will happen?
Yeah. Well, I think and Plouffe was just on TV. David Plouffe was just on TV a couple of 2 hours ago. And we really have to take care of our own space. We all have friends and family members that probably feel pretty upset, maybe not so upset, maybe relieved. With some of the people who were charging the building, they have regrets now. Some don't. Some have become famous. We can't convert 70 or 4. Let's see, how many is it? 74 million, I think it is. Yeah, or 74 million and 81 million to Biden, 81 million. We can't convert all of them, but we do. There is this fringe that do people. One of the biggest fundraisers in this book is a Republican woman who went over to Barack Obama. Okay, and the story is incredible, and why she changed. And there are still, we have to. I think there's a lot of people who just need to have a shoulder to listen to, and just convince them that. And that's the good thing that Trump did for us. I mean, we went through hell and back, but in 2016, I think we're hearing the word fragile in democracy. We talked about that, but boy, did we see how close we came to a tipping point. We were so close to that, and we still are. Cruz is still talking about, we shouldn't impeach him. With the president, the president has to get time to get his legal. Really, Ted? So revenge, no, we can't do revenge because that all comes back at you anyway. But we do have to not let this happen. We have to, maybe impeachment, maybe trial, I don't know. We cannot let a Donald Trump happen to our country again, because I don't know if we can survive it a second time. And I think that Senator Cruz and Hawley from Missouri, the young guy, both brilliant people, I've been told many times. So that, this was just a ploy because they want to get name recognition and all these totally selfish things. But I think it gave them, for hearing for 4 years that the media, maybe us, gave the pass to Trump. We didn't call them lies. Everybody's calling them falsehoods. So I think my hope is that the media wises up. I watched Fox yesterday. That's my homework, and they were pretty doggone good about the inaugural. I kept Fox on for an hour and a half, and I couldn't believe what was happening. So, but today it's pretty ugly. I can only stand it for 2 hours, and don't ever go between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Do it in the middle of the day after something like the inaugural, where they have panels and Donna Brazil's there and everything. But we have to take care of our own space, and we have to be respectful. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I want to strangle people. I think of those 3 words in my mind. I inhale. So think of the 3 words. Keep your space open for conversation, for kindness, respect, and listening. Listening is where the hard part is.
Well, Mary Lang Sollinger, thank you so much. And again, the book is From Inspiration to Activism. It really tells some wonderful, wonderful stories and really gives you some powerful information that you can move forward with. And you can get a copy of this book with a $35 donation to the Progressive Magazine. You go to our website, progressive.org/event. Event like this event. And then you can get this book signed and mailed to you by our guest today, Mary Lang Sollinger. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Norm, for your work and for this platform. It was just great. And maybe next year we'll have another book to talk about. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you all for joining us tonight as well. Again, the Progressive Magazine, which did call Donald Trump's words lies when they were spoken throughout the entire 4 years. The Progressive Magazine is available in print. You can go to our website, progressive.org/subscribe, and you can subscribe and have it sent to your home. The new issue will be out in a couple of weeks if you're already a subscriber. And if you haven't, it'll be out to you a couple of weeks after that, because they have to get the mailing list processed and so on to ship the second round. But please do subscribe. Please do support the Progressive Magazine. Again, the brainchild of Bob La Follette, a very popular Wisconsin progressive governor, senator, and presidential candidate in the first part of the 20th century, and legacy carries on in this magazine today. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight in this live virtual event co-hosted by A Room of One's Own, our local bookstore here in Madison, Wisconsin, which also has Mary's books available, as well as many, many other fine products. Thank you all so much.